How did a harmless joke at a party turn into the moment a respected professional quietly dismantled a friendship? What happens when a man who protected his sobriety for 15 years chooses silence instead of confrontation? This is how one smile, one glass, and one quiet decision changed everything. Before we go any further, take a second to subscribe, hit the hype button, and like the video. It really helps the channel grow. And tell us in the comments, what would you do in this situation? My name is Grant Merrick, and I am 44 years old. I work as a database administrator for a mid-sized financial services company called Whitmore Partners, located in the glass and steel heart of the city. It is not a glamorous job. Nobody writes movies about database administrators. Nobody invites us to talk shows or asks for our autographs. We exist in the background, making sure the systems run smoothly, the records stay intact, and the information flows where it needs to go without anyone ever thinking about how it got there. But I am good at my job. Very good. I have been doing it for almost 20 years now, and in that time I have learned something that most people never fully grasp. The people who control the data control everything. They just do it quietly, invisibly, without anyone realizing how much power they actually hold. The flashy executives and the loud salespeople get all the credit, but behind them, people like me keep the whole machine running. And we notice things. We remember things. We document things. That Saturday evening in late April, I was standing in my apartment kitchen, preparing for a party I did not particularly want to attend. The kitchen was small but functional, with white tile countertops, stainless steel appliances, and a window that looked out over the street 3 floors below. Everything was in its place. The dish towels hung evenly on their hooks. The spices were alphabetized in the cabinet. The floor had been mopped that morning. Some people might call that obsessive. I call it discipline. When you have spent years rebuilding your life from the ground up, you learn to appreciate order. You learn that small routines, repeated daily, are the foundation of something larger, something stable. Reese Rowe, a small business owner I had known for nearly a decade, was hosting a gathering at his home that evening. 12, maybe 15 people, old colleagues from various jobs, a few neighbors from his street, some business contacts he was trying to cultivate. Nothing special. The kind of party where people stood around with drinks in their hands, making small talk about work and weather and weekend plans. I did not particularly enjoy these events. I never had, even before I got sober. But I attended them because that was what you did when you wanted to maintain connections, when you wanted to stay part of the social fabric that held professional communities together. Disappear from enough gatherings and people start to forget you exist. Sometimes that is fine, sometimes it is not. I opened the refrigerator and pulled out a can of sparkling water. The can was cold in my hand, beaded with condensation from the temperature difference. I cracked it open with a satisfying hiss and took a long drink. The bubbles stung my throat in that clean, harmless way that always reminded me I was still here, still standing, still sober. 15 years. That is how long it had been since I put down the bottle and picked up structure, discipline, control, routine. Those words might sound boring to most people, might sound like a life drained of color and spontaneity. But to me, they meant survival. They meant waking up every morning with a clear head and a functioning life. They meant not losing everything again. I finished the sparkling water and checked the clock on the microwave. 6:43. The party started at 7, and Reese's house was a 14-minute walk from my apartment. I had done that walk many times before, and I knew exactly how long it took at a comfortable pace. I also knew exactly which route to take. Past the dry cleaner on the corner of 5th and Maple, turn left at the pharmacy with the flickering neon sign that had never been fixed in all the years I had been walking past it, cross the small parking lot next to the dental clinic with the faded awning, and there it was. A 2-story house with beige siding, a wide front porch with white railings, and lights already glowing warmly behind the curtains. I had already showered, shaved, and pressed my shirt. My hair was combed into something presentable, parted neatly on the left side the way I had worn it for years. My shoes were polished. My slacks had a crease sharp enough to cut paper. I looked, by all appearances, like a man who had his act together, like someone whose life was under control, and it was. I just had to work harder for it than most people realized. The walk to Reese's house was pleasant enough. The evening air was cool but not cold, carrying hints of early spring, fresh-cut grass, blooming flowers, the faint sweetness of trees coming back to life after winter. I passed the dry cleaner, turned at the pharmacy, crossed the parking lot. The dental clinic was dark, closed for the weekend. A cat sat on the low wall nearby, watching me pass with the indifferent gaze that cats seem to have perfected over millennia. I could hear music before I even reached Reese's front steps. Not loud, just present. Something jazzy and inoffensive, the kind of music chosen specifically to fill silences and make people feel sophisticated without demanding any actual attention. Background noise designed by committee. I climbed the porch stairs, my polished shoes clicking against the painted wood, and rang the doorbell. Reese opened the door with his usual overworked smile. He was a heavy-set man in his early 50s, with thinning gray hair that he combed carefully across his scalp in a losing battle against time. His handshake was soft and quick, the kind of handshake that conveyed obligation rather than genuine welcome. He was already looking past me, already thinking about the next guest, the next conversation, the next item on his mental checklist. "Grant, good to see you. Come in, come in. Drinks are in the kitchen. Food is on the dining room table. Make yourself at home." Make yourself at home. That phrase always struck me as strange. Nobody really means it. It is just a thing people say to sound welcoming without actually having to do anything welcoming. If I genuinely made myself at home, if I kicked off my shoes and stretched out on his couch, Reese would probably have a quiet heart attack. I stepped inside and moved through the living room, nodding at familiar faces as I passed. The room was warm with bodies and conversation, the air carrying traces of cologne and perfume and the sharp smell of alcohol. Soft lamplight cast everything in a golden glow. People stood in clusters, drinks in hand, laughing at jokes I could not hear. A few of them nodded back at me. Some did not bother. That was fine. I was not here to be the center of attention. I was here to maintain appearances, to show that I was still part of this social circle, still connected, still normal. An appearance, nothing more. And then I saw him. Pierce Caldwell stood near the fireplace at the far end of the living room, glass in hand, laughing at something someone had just said. He had one of those laughs that filled a room. Not because it was genuine, not because it came from any real place of joy, but because he wanted everyone to hear it. He wanted everyone to notice him, to be aware of his presence, to understand that he was the most important person in whatever space he occupied. Pierce was 45 years old, a sales executive at a regional firm called Morrison & Associates, and the kind of man who walked through life as if it owed him something. He was tall, perhaps 6'2", with broad shoulders that he kept deliberately squared. His skin carried a perpetual tan that looked almost natural, but probably came from a salon. His hair was dark and thick and styled with obvious care. And he possessed a confidence that bordered on arrogance, the kind of self-assurance that came not from actual accomplishment, but from never having been seriously challenged. He dressed well, spoke loudly, and had a talent for making everyone around him feel slightly less important. He was the kind of person who walked into a room and immediately began assessing who was worth his time and who was not. The kind of person who treated waiters and assistants like furniture. The kind of person who smiled at you while silently calculating what you could do for him. I had known Pierce for nearly 2 decades. We had met at a company training session back when we were both in our mid-20s, hungry and ambitious, and convinced the world was waiting for us to conquer it. We had worked at the same company, Granger Financial, for 5 years before our paths diverged. He moved into sales, where his personality was an asset. I moved into data management, where my attention to detail was valued. We had played cards on Friday nights throughout our 30s, part of a rotating group of guys who gathered in various basements and kitchens to drink and gamble and pretend we were still young. We had attended each other's weddings, or rather, I had attended his, twice, because he had been married twice. The first time was to a woman named Diana, a quiet accountant who seemed perpetually surprised to find herself married to someone so loud. That marriage lasted 4 years before she filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. The second was to Zoya, a real estate agent with expensive tastes and a tolerance for Pierce's behavior that lasted exactly 6 years before running out completely. He had attended my wedding too, once, before everything fell apart and my own marriage became another casualty of the person I used to be. We were not close anymore, not really, but we still occupied the same social orbit, showed up at the same events, and maintained the polite fiction that we were still friends. That was how things worked in these circles. You did not cut people off dramatically. You did not have confrontations or clear breaks. You just slowly drifted apart while pretending nothing had changed, and everyone agreed to ignore the distance that had opened up between you. Pierce noticed me from across the room. His face lit up with that familiar grin, the one that always looked slightly predatory to me, like a cat spotting a mouse who did not realize it was being watched. He excused himself from the group he had been holding court with and began making his way toward me, weaving through the crowd with the easy confidence of a man who expected people to move out of his way. He raised his glass in greeting. I raised my hand in return. That should have been enough. That simple exchange of acknowledgments should have been the extent of our interaction for the evening. We could have nodded at each other from across the room, perhaps exchanged a few words if we happened to end up in the same conversational cluster, and gone our separate ways at the end of the night. That would have been fine. That would have been normal. But Pierce had never been satisfied with enough. He reached me and clapped a hand on my shoulder, squeezing just a little too hard. His grip was firm, almost aggressive, the kind of handshake that was really a dominance display dressed up as friendliness. "Grant! There he is. The safest man in America." A few people nearby chuckled at his words. Pierce liked that. He lived for those little moments of social approval, the tiny validations that confirmed his place at the center of things. Every laugh was a trophy. Every smile directed his way was proof that he was winning some invisible competition the rest of us did not even know we were part of. "Good to see you too, Pierce," I said evenly. "Let me get you something to drink. What are you having? Wait, let me guess." He put a finger to his temple, miming deep thought, playing to the small audience that had formed around us. "Sparkling water. Or maybe cranberry juice. Something with bubbles, but no courage." More laughter from the people nearby. Not cruel exactly, just casual. Like I was a harmless thing to observe. A curiosity. A running joke that everyone was in on except me. "Sparkling water is fine," I said. Pierce grinned wider, showing teeth that had probably cost more than my car. "Of course it is. Stay right here. I will get it for you myself. Cannot have Grant going thirsty, can we?" I watched him walk toward the kitchen, that easy, confident stride of his carrying him through the crowd like a ship through calm water. Something in my chest tightened. Not anger, exactly. Just awareness. A warning signal I had learned to recognize over many years of paying attention to my own reactions. I had learned to notice when something felt wrong, when a situation had an edge to it that others might miss. It was part of staying sober, part of protecting the life I had built. You learn to trust your instincts, even when they could not tell you exactly what the problem was. I ignored the warning. I was good at ignoring things when it seemed like the socially appropriate response. That was how you got through events like this. You smiled, you nodded, you ignored the small discomforts and minor humiliations and kept your attention on getting through the evening without incident. Pierce returned a minute later with a glass, clear liquid, bubbles catching the light from the lamp behind me, ice cubes clinking against the sides with a pleasant crystalline sound. It looked exactly like sparkling water. It looked harmless. It looked like exactly what I had asked for. "Here you go, buddy," Pierce said, handing me the glass with a flourish. "Cheers." I took the glass. Our fingers touched briefly in the exchange. His were cold from the ice, slightly damp with condensation. I brought the glass to my lips and took a sip. The burn was immediate. It hit the back of my throat like a hot wire, sharp and unmistakable and impossible to misidentify. The taste bloomed across my tongue, spreading through my mouth with a familiarity that made my entire body freeze. Every nerve ending seemed to fire at once. Every alarm in my head began screaming. I knew that taste. I had not felt it in 15 years, not since the night I poured out every bottle in my apartment and swore I would never touch the stuff again. But I knew it instantly, the way you know the face of someone you loved, even after decades apart. Vodka. I lowered the glass slowly, carefully, keeping my hand from shaking through sheer force of will. My heart was pounding in my chest. My mind was racing through implications and responses and possibilities. But my face remained calm. My expression did not change. I had learned long ago how to keep my inner turmoil from showing on my surface. Pierce was watching me, still smiling, still waiting for something. A reaction, maybe. A moment of shock or confusion or anger that he could laugh at. A crack in my composure that would prove he had gotten to me. "Something wrong?" he asked, eyebrows raised in exaggerated innocence. His voice was light, casual, the voice of a man who had done nothing more significant than hand someone a drink at a party. I looked at him, at his eyes, searching my face for cracks. At his mouth, curved into that knowing smile. At his posture, relaxed and confident, the body language of a man who believed himself untouchable. "No," I said. My voice came out steady, calm, almost bored. "It is fine." I raised the glass again and took another drink, slowly, with intent. I emptied it in 3 measured gulps while Pierce looked on, his grin faltering for a heartbeat before settling back even wider. The vodka went down hot and sharp, a heated line that settled in my stomach and gradually spread a steady warmth through my body. 15 years of sobriety, gone in 30 seconds. Because a man I had known for 2 decades thought it would be funny. "That is the spirit," Pierce said, reaching out to clap my shoulder again. "See? Loosening up looks good on you. I have been saying it for years, Grant. You take everything too seriously. Sometimes you just need to relax a little." "You have been saying that," I agreed. I handed him the empty glass and excused myself, muttering something about needing to use the bathroom. He let me go with another laugh, already turning to find his next source of entertainment. The bathroom was at the end of a narrow hallway, past a row of framed family photographs I did not bother to look at. I walked calmly, casually, like a man who simply needed to use the facilities. Nothing unusual, nothing wrong. Just Grant Merrick, predictable as always, excusing himself from the party. I closed the door behind me, locked it with a soft click, and leaned over the sink. My reflection stared back at me from the mirror. Pale, composed, eyes colder than I remembered seeing them. The face of a man who had just been ambushed by someone he had trusted, who had just had 15 years of careful work threatened for a laugh. The alcohol was already moving through me. Not much. There had only been maybe 2 shots worth in that glass, but enough. Enough to wake something I had buried a long time ago. The warmth spreading through my chest. The slight loosening of tension in my shoulders. That treacherous whisper in the back of my brain that said, maybe one drink is not so bad. Maybe you have been overreacting all these years. Maybe you can handle it now. I turned on the faucet and let the water run. The sound filled the silence. A rushing white noise that masked any other sounds from the party. I stood there for 3 full minutes, watching the water spiral down the drain, thinking about what had just happened and what I could do about it. I could go back out there. I could confront Pierce in front of everyone. I could demand to know what he had put in my drink, could make a scene, could let the anger out and force him to face what he had done. But I knew exactly how that would go. I had seen it before, in other situations, with other people. Pierce would deny everything, or he would admit it, but laugh it off, treat it as a harmless prank that anyone with a sense of humor would appreciate. People would take sides based on who they liked better, not on what was right. Voices would be raised, emotions would run high. And by next week, the whole thing would become just another story Pierce told at parties. The time Grant Merrick lost his mind over a little joke. I would become even more of a punchline than I already was. No, that was not how this was going to work. I dried my hands on the small towel hanging next to the sink. I straightened my collar. I looked at myself in the mirror one more time, staring into my own eyes until I was sure they would not betray me. And then I made a decision. I would not confront Pierce tonight. I would not give him the satisfaction of seeing me angry or upset or rattled. I would go back out to that party, and I would smile, and I would nod, and I would be exactly what everyone expected me to be. Calm, predictable, boring Grant Merrick. But I would not forget. And I would not forgive. Pierce Caldwell had made a mistake tonight. A big one. He just did not know it yet. I walked back out into the living room with the same calm expression I had worn when I arrived. The party continued around me like nothing had happened, because to everyone else, nothing had. Just another Saturday evening. Just another gathering of professionals making small talk. Just another glass of something served at a party. I stayed for another hour. I smiled at appropriate moments, laughed at jokes that were not funny, nodded during conversations I was not really listening to. I shook hands with Reese on my way out and thanked him for hosting. I put on my coat and walked to the door and stepped out into the cool night air. And when the door closed behind me and I was finally alone, standing on Reese Rowe's front porch with the muffled sounds of the party barely audible through the walls, I felt something I had not felt in a very long time. Purpose, not anger, not sadness, not self-pity, just a cold, clear sense of purpose, settling over me like a blanket of snow. I walked down the porch steps and began the journey home. The night air was cool against my face, carrying away the last traces of warmth from the vodka. The streets were quiet, the stars were out. I had work to do. And for the first time in years, I was looking forward to it. The walk home took twice as long as it should have. I did not take the direct route, did not retrace my steps through the familiar streets I had walked earlier that evening. Instead, I wandered. I let my feet carry me through the neighborhood without any particular destination, processing what had happened and what it meant. In the end, I wandered to the old park near the middle of the neighborhood, sitting on a wooden bench beside the stone fountain that had not worked for years. The basin was cracked and dark, filled with fallen leaves that had piled up through seasons of neglect. No one had bothered to fix it. No one seemed to care. It simply remained there, a leftover from an earlier period when people still put effort into shared spaces. I sat there for almost an hour, listening to the distant sounds of the city and watching the shadows lengthen as the night deepened around me. Most people think sobriety is about willpower, about gritting your teeth and saying no to drinks at parties and resisting the urge when things get difficult. They think it is a matter of strength versus weakness, discipline versus temptation, good intentions battling bad habits. But it is more complicated than that, much more complicated. Real sobriety is about building an entirely new life, one where the urge to drink does not have a place anymore because you have filled all the spaces it used to occupy with other things. structure, routine, discipline, meaning. You rebuild yourself piece by piece, carefully and deliberately, creating a version of yourself that does not need alcohol to function. That is what I had done. That is what those 15 years represented. Every morning I woke up at exactly 6:15, my alarm set to the same time, regardless of weekends or holidays. Every day I followed the same basic schedule: shower, breakfast, work, lunch at noon, more work, gym 3 times a week, dinner at 6, reading until 9, bed by 10:30. I tracked my exercise, my spending, my sleep patterns. I kept journals that documented my thoughts and feelings and progress. Those journals would bore anyone who tried to read them. Endless pages of mundane observations about weather and work and the minor events of daily life. But they kept me grounded. They reminded me who I was and what I had built and how far I had come from the wreckage of what I used to be. And Pierce knew all of it. He was not a stranger. He was not some casual acquaintance who might not understand the significance of what he had done. We had been friends for 20 years. We had talked about my recovery back when it was still fresh and raw, and I still needed to talk about it. He had been there when I first got sober, had listened to me explain what I was going through, had nodded sympathetically and said all the right things. He knew what those 15 years meant. He knew how hard I had worked. He knew the stakes, and he had done it anyway. I thought back over the years, sitting there on that bench, and I started to see a pattern I had been willfully ignoring for far too long. The jokes had started smaller, little comments here and there, easy to laugh off, easy to dismiss as good-natured teasing between friends. Grant is not drinking tonight. What a surprise. Someone give Grant a juice box. Careful, Grant might actually have fun if we are not watching. Then they had gotten bigger, more pointed, harder to ignore. Pierce had started calling me the safety net. Grant, the guy who never took risks. The designated driver who did not even need to be asked because everyone knew he would say yes. The one you could count on to leave a party early, to order water at dinner, to skip the toast at weddings because he could not participate. The one who was always there to be reliable and boring and safe. I had become a punchline masquerading as a friend, and I had let it happen. I had laughed along when he made the jokes, because it was easier than explaining, easier than making people uncomfortable, easier than being the one who could not take a joke, the sensitive one, the one who made social situations awkward. But sitting on that bench, with the taste of vodka still faint on my tongue and the cool night air filling my lungs, I finally saw the truth I had been avoiding. I had not been keeping the peace. I had been surrendering. Tolerance without respect is not friendship. It is not patience or maturity or taking the high road. It is just surrender, dressed up in polite clothing. And I had been surrendering to Pierce Caldwell for 20 years, letting him chip away at my dignity one joke at a time, convincing myself that this was what maintaining relationships required. It was not. It never had been. I got home around midnight. The apartment was dark and quiet, exactly the way I had left it. 3 rooms, sparsely furnished, everything in its proper place. A home designed for stability, not comfort, for function, not beauty. My phone showed 2 missed calls from Quinn and 3 text messages. I read them while I boiled water for tea in the small electric kettle I kept on the counter. Hey, it is me, just checking in. Have not heard from you today. Hope the party is going okay. Call me back when you get a chance. Love you. Then, an hour later. Grant, you okay? You usually text by now. Just want to make sure everything is all right. Not trying to hover, just call me. And then, just before midnight. Going to bed. Text me when you get home so I know you are safe. Love you. Quinn, my younger sister. 6 years behind me, which meant she had been 19 when I hit bottom. Old enough to fully understand what was happening, young enough to still be traumatized by it decades later. She had been there through all of it. The late-night phone calls when I was too far gone to know who I was calling. The broken promises made and broken again. The hospitalizations. She had never judged me, even when I gave her every reason to. She had never given up on me, never walked away, never treated me like a lost cause. She had driven me to my first meeting. She had sat with me in the hospital that terrible night we never talked about anymore. She had helped me clean my apartment when I finally got sober, when I was strong enough to face the wreckage of what my life had become. She had never stopped worrying about me. I could hear it in her voice every time we talked, that slight edge of concern that she tried to hide but never quite managed. I hated that I had put it there. Hated that my past decisions still echoed through her life, making her anxious about phone calls and unanswered texts. I sent her a simple message. Home safe, long evening, talk tomorrow. She responded within seconds, as if she had been waiting up. Okay, good. Get some rest. Love you. I put the phone down and carried my tea to the small table by the window. The city lights blinked in the distance, 1,000 tiny beacons scattered across the darkness. Somewhere out there, the party at Reese's house was probably winding down. People would be saying their goodbyes, collecting their coats, calling for ride shares. Pierce would be one of the last to leave, holding court until there was no one left to perform for. He would go home tonight feeling satisfied, feeling like he had won some game I did not even know we were playing. He would tell himself that the thing with the drink was harmless, just a bit of fun, a way to help his uptight friend loosen up. He had no idea. No idea what he had awakened in me. No idea that by pouring that drink, by watching me swallow it with that smirk on his face, by treating my carefully constructed life as a joke that needed a punchline, he had finally pushed too far. He thought I was weak, predictable, safe, someone who would absorb any insult, tolerate any disrespect, swallow any humiliation, because that was just what boring, reliable Grant Merrick did. He was about to learn how wrong he was. The morning after the party, I woke at my usual time, 6:15. I lay in bed for several minutes, staring at the ceiling, running through the previous evening in my mind. The party, the crowd, Pierce's face as he handed me that glass, the burn of the vodka hitting my throat, the smile he wore while he watched me drink it. I was not hungover. The amount of alcohol in that one drink was not nearly enough to produce physical symptoms, especially in someone my size who had not consumed anything in 15 years. But there was something else, something I had not expected. Clarity. A sharpening of focus that had settled over me during the night, as if a lens that had been slightly out of alignment for years had suddenly clicked into perfect position. I got up, showered, and made my usual breakfast. Toast with butter, a soft-boiled egg, black coffee with no sugar. I ate at the kitchen counter, watching the morning light creep through the window, and I started to plan. The first thing I did was open my laptop and create a new text document. I saved it to a new folder, labeling it simply with the date of the party, April 19th. Then I began to write. I wrote down everything I could remember about the previous evening, in as much detail as I could reconstruct. The time I arrived, the layout of the room, the names of people I had seen and where they had been standing, the exact location of Pierce when he first spotted me across the crowd, the words he had used, as close to verbatim as my memory would allow, the way he had walked to the kitchen, the way he had returned with that glass, holding it carefully, making sure not to spill. The burn when I swallowed, his expression as he watched me drink. I wrote it all down, every detail I could remember, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant. The color of the lampshade behind me, the song that had been playing in the background, the number of ice cubes in the glass, everything. Then I saved the file, backed it up to my private cloud storage, and encrypted the folder with a password only I knew. This was how I worked. This was what I was good at. In my profession, data was everything. The ability to collect information, organize it, and present it clearly was the foundation of my entire career. I had spent 20 years learning how to do this, how to take raw, chaotic information and transform it into something coherent and undeniable. Confrontation was messy. It depended on emotions, on charisma, on who could speak more persuasively in the moment. Confrontation was theater, and theater favored people like Pierce. People who knew how to perform, how to work a crowd, how to make themselves look good under pressure. But documentation was different. Documentation was permanent, objective, silent, but unassailable. Documentation accumulated slowly, piece by piece, detail by detail, until it formed something that could not be argued with or charmed away. I was very, very good at documentation. Over the next several days, I went about my life as if nothing had changed. I went to work, attended meetings, completed my projects on time. I went to the gym on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I ran my usual routes through the neighborhood on the mornings in between. I maintained my schedule with the same precision I always had. But underneath that calm surface, fundamental changes were taking place. I started paying attention to Pierce in ways I never had before. At the social gatherings we both attended, I watched him more carefully. I noticed how he moved through rooms, always positioning himself at the center of things. I observed how he spoke to different people, adjusting his voice and manner depending on who he was trying to impress. His laugh was louder when important people were watching. His charm was deployed strategically, like a weapon. And I noticed how he treated those he considered beneath him, the servers at restaurants, barely acknowledged, the assistants and junior employees spoken to dismissively or not at all. Anyone who could not do something for him was simply furniture, objects to be ignored until they became useful. I also noticed how he talked about me when he thought I was not listening or when he assumed I was too far away to hear. 2 weeks after the party, I was at a coffee shop near the office district, sitting in a corner booth with my laptop, working on some documentation for a project at my actual job. The shop was moderately busy, the kind of mid-morning crowd you would expect on a Tuesday, professionals grabbing caffeine between meetings, students studying for exams, a few remote workers like me using the space as a temporary office. Pierce walked in with 2 colleagues from his sales team. They did not see me. I was tucked away in my corner, partially obscured by a large potted plant that the coffee shop had positioned to create the illusion of separate spaces. They were too busy laughing at something, too caught up in their own conversation, to notice their surroundings. They sat down at a table near the window, ordered their drinks, and continued their conversation. I watched them over the top of my laptop screen, my fingers moving occasionally to give the appearance of working. "Did you hear about Reese Rowe's party?" one of the colleagues asked. Pierce grinned, that familiar, predatory grin. "Oh, I was there. Had a great time. I heard Grant Merrick was there too. Someone said he actually drank something for once." "He did," Pierce said, leaning back in his chair with obvious satisfaction. "Because I helped him out. Gave him a little encouragement." "What do you mean?" "Let us just say I made his sparkling water a little more interesting." Pierce winked. He did not even realize what was happening until it was too late. But honestly, the guy needed it. You have seen how wound up he is. It was basically a public service. The men at the table laughed. One of them raised his coffee cup in a mock toast. I lowered my head and typed, keeping my expression neutral, giving no indication that I was listening to every word. My phone was on the table beside me, voice memo app running in the background from a work habit I had developed months earlier and never bothered to turn off. When they finally finished their drinks and left, I sat in that booth for another 20 minutes, replaying the recording through my earphones, making detailed notes in my document. A public service, he had called it, making my 15 years of sobriety more interesting. Like my entire recovery was just an inconvenience that needed correcting. That evening, I sat in my home office, a converted second bedroom with a desk, a filing cabinet, and a whiteboard I used for organizing projects. I added the coffee shop recording to my growing collection of evidence. I transcribed the relevant portions, noting the exact words Pierce had used, the names of the witnesses, the date and time and location. This was not revenge, not yet. This was inventory. And my inventory was growing. Quinn came to visit the following Saturday. She lived 6 blocks away in a small 1-bedroom apartment facing the river, but we did not see each other as often as we probably should have. She worked long hours at a nonprofit organization downtown, coordinating volunteer programs and community outreach. I was protective of my routines in ways that sometimes made spontaneous visits difficult to manage, but she had been texting more frequently since the party. I could tell she sensed something was different. Quinn had always been perceptive that way, able to read my moods even when I thought I was hiding them effectively. Maybe it was a sibling thing, maybe it was just years of practice. She showed up around noon with a reusable bag full of groceries and a determined expression on her face. "I am making you lunch," she announced when I opened the door. No arguments. I was not planning to argue. Good, because I was not planning to listen. I stood aside and let her into the apartment. She knew the space well, had helped me choose most of the furniture when I moved in years ago. She moved through the rooms with easy familiarity, setting the grocery bag on the kitchen counter and immediately beginning to pull out ingredients. I sat on one of the stools at the counter and watched her work. She was a good cook, better than I was. When we were younger, before everything went wrong, she used to make elaborate meals for holidays and birthdays. She had scaled back since then, but she still knew her way around a kitchen. "So," she said after a while, not looking up from the cutting board where she was dicing vegetables, "you want to tell me what happened at that party?" I had not planned to talk about it, had not even fully decided whether I was going to tell Quinn what Pierce had done, but she had a way of asking questions that made silence feel like dishonesty, like keeping the information from her was itself a kind of lie. "Pierce gave me a drink," I said. Her knife stopped moving. She looked up at me, her expression carefully neutral, but her eyes sharp with sudden attention. "What kind of drink?" "The kind I have not had in 15 years. She set down the knife and turned to face me fully, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Her face was still composed, but I could see the anger building behind her eyes, the protective fury that she had carried since we were children. "He spiked your water?" "He brought me a glass that looked like sparkling water. It was not." "And you drank it?" I realized what it was after the first sip. But yes, I finished the glass. Why? I thought about how to answer that question, how to explain the calculation that had run through my head in that split second after the burn hit my throat. The instant understanding that making a scene would give Pierce exactly what he wanted. The awareness that any confrontation, no matter how justified, would be twisted and minimized and turned into a story where I was the unreasonable one. "Because he wanted me to react," I said finally. And I decided not to give him that satisfaction. Quinn was quiet for a long moment. I could see her processing the information, working through her own emotions, deciding how to respond. Finally, she turned back to the stove and resumed cooking, her movements slightly more forceful than before. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I am still figuring that out." "Grant." Her voice was careful now, measured, the way it got when she was worried about me but did not want to push too hard. "You know I support you. You know I trust your judgment. But revenge fantasies are not healthy. They can keep you stuck, focused on the past instead of moving forward." "This is not a fantasy." She glanced at me over her shoulder. Then what is it?" I watched her stir the vegetables in the pan, sending up clouds of fragrant steam. How could I explain what I was feeling? The cold, clear focus that had settled over me since the party. The sense that I was finally seeing something that had been hidden in plain sight for 2 decades. "Pierce has been treating me like this for years," I said. "Not just the drink, everything, the jokes, the condescension, the way he talks about me like I'm a pet that someone forgot to train properly. I let it happen because I thought that was what friendship required. Tolerance, patience, turning the other cheek, being the bigger person." I shook my head slowly. But I was wrong. That is not friendship. That is contempt wearing a polite mask, and I am done pretending I do not see it. Quinn was quiet for a long time. She finished cooking, plated the food, and brought it to the counter. She sat down across from me, and we ate in silence for several minutes. Finally, she spoke. "I am not saying Pierce does not deserve consequences. He does. What he did was unforgivable, but I need you to be careful. Do not let him turn you into someone you do not want to be." I met her eyes. I have never felt more like myself. She held my gaze for a moment, searching for something. Whatever she was looking for, she seemed to find it. She nodded once. "Okay, then I am with you. Whatever you decide to do." "Thank you. That means more than you know." Over the following weeks, I continued my quiet campaign of observation and collection. I attended every social gathering where I knew Pierce would be present, business networking events, casual dinners organized by mutual acquaintances, the occasional happy hour that I would normally have skipped. I went to all of them, but not as a participant, as a witness. I watched Pierce work rooms with practiced ease, deploying his charm strategically, identifying the people who could help him and discarding the ones who could not. I noticed how his behavior changed depending on his audience. Warm and engaging with potential clients, dismissive with anyone lower on the social ladder, carefully neutral with people whose position he was not sure of. And I documented everything. I began to notice patterns in his professional behavior as well. Small comments about clients, jokes about cutting corners, boasts about finding ways around company policies when they slowed him down. "Rules are for people who do not know how to play the game," he said once at a dinner I attended. Several people laughed. I made a note. I also did research. Public records, corporate filings, newspaper articles from trade publications. I searched for any mentions of Pierce or his company, any hint of past controversies or complaints. I was thorough. I was patient. I discovered that Pierce had been involved in several workplace incidents over the years, disputes that had been quietly handled through internal processes. None of them had resulted in formal discipline, at least not publicly. Pierce was too valuable, too well connected, too good at making himself appear essential to his company's success. But the patterns were there if you knew how to look. A complaint from a female colleague about comments he had made at a work dinner, a disagreement over expense reports that had required intervention from senior management. A junior employee who had resigned abruptly after a project Pierce was leading went badly off the rails. I documented all of it. Names, dates, any details I could find or piece together from conversations I had overheard. Around this time, I also scheduled a consultation with a lawyer Quinn's contact had recommended. Her name was Helen Meyer, and she specialized in employment disputes and harassment cases, with additional experience in corporate ethics and professional misconduct. We met at her office on a Tuesday afternoon. The building was downtown, one of those older structures with marble floors and brass fixtures that suggested old money and serious business. Her office was on the 6th floor, with windows overlooking the city street below. Helen was a direct woman in her mid-50s, with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun and an expression that suggested she had heard every story there was and was difficult to surprise. I appreciated that. I did not want sympathy or outrage. I wanted practical guidance. "Let me make sure I understand the situation," she said after I had explained what happened. "This man, Pierce Caldwell, deliberately served you an alcoholic drink knowing that you were in recovery from alcohol dependency, and you consumed the drink before realizing what it contained." "I realized after the first sip," I clarified, "but I finished the glass." Why? Because I did not want to give him the satisfaction of a reaction in that moment. I wanted time to think, to plan. Helen nodded slowly. And now you are looking for... What, exactly? What outcome do you want? Accountability. I want him to face real, meaningful consequences for what he did, not a private conversation or a social awkwardness, something on record, something that affects his professional standing. I have to be direct with you, Helen said, leaning back in her chair. Criminal charges are extremely unlikely in this situation. There is no law against being cruel at a party. You suffered no physical injury. Nothing that happened meets the legal threshold for assault or endangerment in any meaningful sense. I understand that. But, she held up a finger. Professional consequences are a different matter. If you can document intentional misconduct, particularly a pattern of inappropriate behavior, that information can be presented to his employer, his professional associations, any ethics boards, or industry councils he is affiliated with. It would not result in him going to jailhouse, but it could certainly damage his reputation and his career. That is what I want. Then you need documentation. Thorough, well-organized documentation, recorded statements where you had legal right to record, time-stamped messages, witness statements if anyone is willing to provide them. The more you have, the stronger your case becomes. I have already started gathering these things. Helen raised an eyebrow, looking at me with what might have been the first glimmer of genuine interest I had seen from her. How? I explained the recording from the coffee shop, the timeline I was building, the messages and social media posts I had screenshotted and saved. She listened without interrupting, making occasional notes on the yellow legal pad in front of her. You will need to be careful, she said when I finished. Everything you collect must be obtained legally. No recordings in situations where you do not have a right to record. No accessing his private accounts or devices. Nothing that could be construed as stalking or harassment on your part. I understand. Everything I have gathered so far is from public or semi-public situations where I had a legitimate reason to be present. Good. Keep it that way. She paused, studying me for a moment. Grant, I have to ask, are you prepared for the possibility that even with everything you collect, nothing significant happens? People like Pierce often find ways to land on their feet. He might face some embarrassment, some professional setbacks, but he might also bounce back. I considered the question carefully before answering. I appreciate the warning, but I am not doing this for any particular outcome. I am doing this because it is right, because someone should hold him accountable, and no one else is going to do it. Helen nodded slowly. That is actually a healthy perspective. People who hang their emotional well-being on specific outcomes tend to be disappointed, but people who focus on the process, they usually find more satisfaction in the work itself. I thanked her for her time and left her office with a clearer sense of my path forward. The weeks continued to pass. Spring gave way to early summer, the trees in the park filled out with thick green leaves, and the days grew longer and warmer. I maintained all of my routines, the morning workouts, the careful meals, the early bedtimes. My life looked exactly the same from the outside, the same predictable patterns that everyone expected from boring, reliable Grant Merrick. But inside, something had fundamentally shifted. I had a purpose now, a project, a goal that organized my days and gave meaning to the hours I spent watching, listening, documenting. I also began carefully cultivating a relationship with Arden Hargreaves. Arden was a corporate compliance officer at a consulting firm called Sterling Associates, which had business ties to Pierce's company through various industry partnerships. I had met her briefly at a conference several years earlier, one of those sprawling business events where you shake 100 hands and remember about 3 names. We had exchanged polite emails occasionally since then, the kind of professional maintenance that everyone in our circles engaged in. She was sharp, diligent, and took her role seriously. The kind of person who believed in rules and processes, who saw her job as protecting organizations from the people who would damage them if left unchecked. I did not approach her directly with my concerns about Pierce. That would have been too obvious, too easily traced back to me. Instead, I began to position myself to have conversations with her that touched on the issues without directly naming anyone. At a luncheon we both attended, I steered our conversation toward corporate ethics in general terms. I have been thinking a lot about workplace culture lately, I said, as casually as I could manage. How problems often go unaddressed because people are afraid to come forward or because the person causing the problems is too well connected. Arden nodded thoughtfully. That is definitely something we see. People are often reluctant to report issues involving popular or powerful individuals. What happens when someone does come forward? Hypothetically speaking, if someone in a professional context discovered that a colleague had been engaging in misconduct, not necessarily illegal misconduct, but behavior that reflected badly on their judgment and character, what would the process look like? She considered the question carefully before responding. It depends on several factors: the nature of the misconduct, the person's role and visibility, whether there is documentation to support the allegations. Generally speaking, if it is something that could expose the company or the professional community to liability or embarrassment, it gets taken seriously. And if there was a pattern, I pressed, multiple incidents over a period of time? Patterns are significant, Arden said firmly. One incident might be explained away. A pattern suggests a systemic problem, someone who represents an ongoing risk to whatever organizations they are associated with. I filed that information away carefully and continued building my case. The invitation arrived in my email inbox on a warm Tuesday afternoon in late June. It was for a networking mixer sponsored by the Regional Business Council, a formal event at a renovated warehouse venue downtown, scheduled for mid-July. Several major companies would be represented, including Pierce's employer, Morrison and Associates, which was listed as a major sponsor. There would be speeches and awards and networking opportunities. The invitation described it as a celebration of professional excellence in our community. Pierce would almost certainly be there. This was exactly his kind of event, a target-rich environment of potential clients and business contacts, a stage where he could perform and charm and work his particular brand of magic. I RSVP'd immediately. Then I called Helen Meyer. I think I found my moment, I told her, a public event where he will be present, along with many of the people who influence his professional standing, an ideal venue for information to become common knowledge. Helen was quiet for a moment. What are you planning? I am going to make sure the right people have access to the right information at the right time. I am not going to ambush him or cause a scene. I am just going to make sure the truth is available to anyone who wants to see it. You understand the risks? If this goes wrong, you could end up looking like the vindictive one. I do, but I have been thorough. Everything I have is documented, time-stamped, verified by multiple sources. It is not my word against his. It is his own words, recorded and preserved. There was a pause. Then Helen said, "Let me make some calls. I may be able to help ensure this goes through proper channels rather than looking like a personal vendetta. I would appreciate that." Over the next few weeks, I finalized my preparations with methodical care. I organized all of my documentation into a clean, chronological presentation. The timeline of incidents spanning 20 years, the recordings and careful transcripts, the screenshots of messages and social media posts, the evidence of patterns, connections, repeated behaviors. Helen reviewed everything and made suggestions for improvement. She connected me with a contact at the Regional Business Council's Ethics Board who could receive formal complaints through established procedures. "This is solid work," she said after going through my final document. "You have done this the right way." I also reached out, carefully and discreetly, to several people I had identified as potential witnesses. Colleagues who had observed Pierce's behavior over the years. People who had been present at gatherings where he had said or done things that needed to be on record. Most declined to get involved. I expected that. Nobody wanted to put themselves in the middle of a dispute, especially against someone as connected as Pierce. But 2 agreed to provide written statements, on the condition that their names would be disclosed only if absolutely necessary. That was enough. The night before the mixer, Quinn called me. "Are you ready?" she asked. "I am. Are you nervous?" I thought about the question honestly. Was I nervous? I had been planning this for months. I had considered every angle, prepared for every contingency I could imagine. I knew exactly what I was going to do and how I was going to do it. "No," I said. "I am not nervous. I am just ready." "Okay," she paused. "I support you, Grant. Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know that. I am proud of you for standing up for yourself." "Thank you. That means everything." I hung up and went to bed early. Sleep came easily that night, the way it always did when my mind was clear about my purpose and my path. The venue was spectacular, in that corporate event way that always seemed designed to impress rather than to actually be beautiful. A renovated warehouse with exposed brick walls, soaring vaulted ceilings, and industrial lighting fixtures that someone had decided were fashionable now. Round tables dotted the main floor, each covered with crisp white linens and topped with small centerpieces of fresh flowers. A stage stood at the far end of the room, equipped with a podium, a projection screen, and enough audio-visual equipment to broadcast the event to the whole city if necessary. Servers in black uniforms circulated through the crowd with trays of elaborate appetizers and glasses of wine and sparkling water. The wine glasses were crystal, catching the light and sending little rainbows across the white tablecloths. The appetizers were the kind of things you see at expensive events. tiny towers of cured meat and cheese, miniature crab cakes, perfectly arranged fruit on bamboo skewers. I arrived at 6:45, 15 minutes before the published start time. I wanted to walk the space before it filled up, to note the exits and the sight lines, to see where the cameras were positioned around the room. There would be professional photographers, I knew. Promotional material for the Business Council's website and archives. Whatever happened tonight would be documented. I wore my best suit, the dark gray one I reserved for important occasions, the one I had bought specifically for events like this, where appearance mattered, where you needed to look like you belonged, even if you felt like an outsider. My shirt was crisp white, professionally pressed. My shoes were polished to a mirror shine. My tie was a subtle blue that matched my eyes. I looked by any measure like exactly what I was supposed to be, a successful professional attending a formal business event. Nothing remarkable, nothing suspicious, just another face in the crowd. The room filled gradually over the next half hour. I recognized many of the faces from various networking events and industry conferences over the years. These were the business elite of our region, executives and entrepreneurs, investors and consultants, people with money and influence and carefully cultivated reputations. They moved through the space like they owned it, because in some meaningful sense they did. Pierce arrived around 7:15. I spotted him immediately, even in the growing crowd. He was impossible to miss, the way certain people always are. He moved through the room like a ship cutting through calm water, leaving ripples of attention in his wake. He was wearing a sharp blue suit with a subtle pinstripe, clearly expensive, clearly tailored. His tie was loosened just enough to suggest he was too important to follow dress codes precisely, too comfortable in his own skin to care about formality. He had a drink in his hand within minutes of arriving. Bourbon, probably, his preferred choice for events where he wanted to appear sophisticated but approachable. He laughed loudly at something someone said. He clapped shoulders. He shook hands with the practiced confidence of a man who had spent his whole life learning how to work a room. He was in his element, completely relaxed, completely unaware. I watched him from the edges of the room, standing near one of the tall cocktail tables with my own glass of sparkling water in my hand. I had checked the glass myself this time before bringing it to my lips, making absolutely certain of its contents. At 7:30, the host of the event stepped onto the stage and tapped the microphone. There were the usual preliminaries, acknowledgments of sponsors, thanks to the organizing committee. Then the formal program began with speeches about innovation and leadership. Throughout it all, Pierce worked the edges of the room, networking aggressively with anyone who looked important. I watched him from my position near the wall. He was completely at ease, confident, expansive. At 8:45, there was an intermission. Servers brought out fresh trays of food. The bar got busier. And then something happened that was not on the printed program. A woman walked to the stage and picked up the microphone. Arden Hargreaves. "Excuse me, everyone. If I could have your attention for just a brief moment." The room quieted. Everyone turned toward the stage. "Before we continue with the networking portion of this evening," she said, "there is a matter that has been brought to the attention of the Regional Business Council's Ethics Board." A screen behind Arden lit up. Text appeared, dates, quotes, timestamps. I recognized every piece. I had compiled it all myself. Over the past several months, detailed documentation was submitted concerning a pattern of behavior by an individual within our professional community. This documentation included recorded statements, time-stamped messages, and signed witness statements. All of it has been verified. Pierce was standing near the bar, frozen. His smile had become a fixed grimace. The behavior documented includes deliberate violation of personal boundaries, mockery and sabotage of another individual's protected medical recovery, and intentional deception. Specifically, the individual knowingly served an alcoholic substance to a person he knew had been in recovery for over 15 years. He then made multiple public statements boasting about this action, referring to it as a public service. Heads turned toward Pierce. The individual named in this complaint is Pierce Caldwell, Senior Sales Executive at Morrison & Associates. Mr. Caldwell has been recommended for immediate suspension from all affiliated professional councils. His employer has been notified and will be conducting their own investigation. Pierce took one step forward. "This is insane. You cannot accuse me based on anonymous complaints." "The documentation is not anonymous," Arden said calmly. "The source identified himself willingly. The evidence has been verified by multiple members of the ethics board." "Grant!" Pierce spun and found me in the crowd. "You did this." I held his stare without speaking. "Say something." His voice cracked. "You spent 20 years treating me like I was weak," I said quietly. "Like my recovery was a joke, and you never once considered that patience and attention to detail might be exactly what would bring you down. Two men in dark suits approached Pierce from behind. "Mr. Caldwell," one said, "you need to come with us now." He jerked away. "Do not touch me. I know the way out." He walked toward the exit. At the door, he paused to remove his name badge and place it on a small table. Then he walked out into the night. The door closed behind him. I walked to the table where his badge lay abandoned. Pierce Caldwell, Morrison, and Associates. I looked at it. Then I smiled.